evening, everybody, and welcome to our webinar tonight. We're talking about the Easter holiday, and we have a very special guest. My name is Alan Pedersen. I'm the Executive Director of the Compassionate Friends, and joining me tonight is our partners at Open to Hope, Dr. Gloria Horsley. And Gloria, welcome to the webinar tonight. We have a terrific guest tonight, and she's got a lot of great information. We're going to have some questions, so I want to go ahead and introduce, but our guest tonight is Kay Warren, and in 1980, along with her husband, Rick Warren, who many of you know from obviously the church and from the Purpose-Driven Life, they founded Saddleback Church in Orange County, California. Kay is a best-selling author and a Bible teacher, but she's probably best known for working tirelessly as an advocate for those living with mental illness, with HIV and AIDS, as well as orphaned and vulnerable children. And so she's been quite an advocate and quite a spokesperson for that. Kay is a mother to Amy, Josh, and Matthew, and Matthew is in heaven. And but she's got 5 grandchildren, and Katie, Cassidy, Caleb, Cole, and Claire. So with all that work, we know how busy she is. And Kay, we appreciate you taking the time and being here with us tonight to talk a little bit about the Easter holiday and how we get through it. Welcome to our webinar, Kay Warren.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation. It's just a privilege to talk with you and Gloria, and to know that there are people listening who can identify with the things that I'm feeling right now at this holiday, the grief and the loss, and the way that I miss my son, and the way that holidays can make all of that come into sharp focus. Gloria was talking about, Easter, and how it's, a bit of an unusual holiday, partly because it changes times and all that every year. But for us, it has a particularly poignant connection because Matthew died 5 days after Easter 3 years ago. And last year, which was the 2nd anniversary of his death, was actually on Easter Sunday. So for me, Easter will probably forever have not only personal religious deep significance for me, but it will also have deep personal meaning because it's around the time that we lost our son. So thank you for letting me share some of our experience and some of the things that I'm learning.
Well, thank you, Kay. And I was telling you when we were talking on the phone that my son Scott was killed many years ago, the day 1 minute before Easter. So the Easter was a very sad day for us. And so it is a confusing time. And I'm sure for a lot of people that are listening.
Well, holidays, in general, are just difficult to navigate. They turn up the volume on grief. They amplify the pain of our loss and trigger waves of sorrow. And what I've come to figure out in these 3 years, that it's not even just the big holidays of Christmas and Easter. It's like any special day or any special event can trigger these waves of pain. I remember, like I said, Matthew passed away at Easter, and so Mother's Day came, and of course that was, gut-wrenching for me just a month after his death. But then Memorial Day came just a few weeks after that, and I was not prepared for the way that Memorial Day was going to grab my heart and trigger this huge wave of sorrow. We haven't personally lost anyone through military service. So other than, my general connection to, sharing the grief of families who have lost loved ones, and we commemorate that on Memorial Day. So for us, it was more of the, it's time to get together with family and friends. You got the burgers, the hot dogs, all that kind of stuff. And so here we are gathered on a day that was, for me, more of a minor holiday, but it hit me like a ton of bricks that I kept watching the door. And I realized I was waiting for Matthew, who was generally late to these kind of gatherings. I kept waiting for him to come in. And when it hit me that he was never going to walk through that door for any holiday ever again, it about took me to my knees. And as I recall, I had to leave early. I couldn't stay there any longer because it came crashing over me that here was a holiday that I wasn't expecting to be a triggering event, and yet that's what holidays do. They turn up that volume, they amplify the pain, and then become a trigger. And it really caught me off guard, the power of any holiday. That could be...
I love the fact that you gave yourself permission to leave. Don't you, Alan?
Yeah, you said a couple things. I like the turning up the volume on grief. But you said a couple things there that I also relate to, Kay. My daughter died just a few weeks before 9/11 happened. And that tragedy is kind of, and so, you know, I always think of those families and how that weaves together. And I got blindsided by July 4th, you know, my first 4th of July. And, you know, I just remembered kind of like you, I was at a get-together. Why I was at a 4th of July get-together, that first one, I don't know. But the same thing, I had to leave because these holidays and that, they turn up the volume, but there just seems to be more triggers for us. And so we're not crazy when that happens, year down the road,
No.
years down the road even.
Absolutely. And I think the occasions to desperately miss our children are absolutely limitless. Because it can be a major holiday, it can be a lesser holiday on the calendar, it could be somebody's anniversary, somebody's birthday. I don't even mean the child you lost. I mean, it could be anybody's birthday or anniversary or graduation or, you know, a bar mitzvah or a jogathon or a school play. I mean, any time that you are gathered and it's a special moment, it becomes or can become an occasion to just desperately miss your child. And every one of those moments becomes a grief moment that you have to navigate through. And those are tough.
Yeah.
And so what I think for that is, as I've talked to people, is they constantly, and I know you guys have experienced this, they want us to move on.
Okay, you were talking about a woman that you talked to who was involved with the Sandy Hook, and tell us what she said. I thought that was so connected.
Well, you know, it's difficult to be friends with people who are in deep grief. You know, those of us who have lost a child and are in deep grief are aware that it's taxing on our friendships because they so desperately want us to be who we were. They want us to be the people that they knew us to be. And when we can't seem to move into who we were or revert back to who we were, we're changed, we're altered, it can be difficult on friendships. And the fact is that we can't rush people through any stage. And the goal is not really to move on from grief, which I actually find offensive if somebody tells me I need to move on from my grief. But what I'm trying to do and encourage others is to learn how to move through our grief.
And don't you think, Kay, that sometimes moving through grief, and especially, you know, early people who are real early and new in their grief who might be listening tonight, sometimes that means just laying right down in your grief. That is moving through grief. Sometimes you just have to kind of lay with it and sit with it and hold it for that moment, and to realize that sometimes taking a step backwards is sometimes taking a step forward. And sometimes just being still with your grief and fully feeling it is what eventually gets you moving through it.
Yeah, you talk about it, that it's the hardest work you've ever do. I think that's so important. People don't know how hard it is.
Well, it is. We are such complex beings as human beings. We're material and immaterial, and we need care and nourishment in every part of who we are to be whole and healthy. And so self-care is absolutely vital because it is the hardest work you will ever do. I had no idea. I would say I've done some hard things in my life, but I would hands down say that grieving the loss of my child has been the hardest work I've ever done. And so to take really seriously this notion of taking care of yourself, of self-care in the middle of grief is vital. And the other thing that, you know, I was talking with my friend again this morning and related to, not only is it hard to, you know, be friends with people who have grief because we're not who we used to be, but the fact is that until you can do something, you won't. But when you can, you will. And so when you and I start taking these steps of self-care, you can only move through them as you can. And nobody from the outside of you can rush you, can make it happen faster. There is no timetable. There is no, you know, agenda that says, well, by month 3, you will feel this. By year 2.5, you will be feeling this. It doesn't happen that way. And but just to be comforted with the fact of when you can do something, you will. And if right now you can't do X, Y, Z, don't beat yourself up about it. When you can, you will.
Lacey just asked us, what are some of the ways to move through grief? And I know you've got it on our very next slide. She must be psychic.
Well, I love this quote that I had read because it talks about how if we're going to take care of ourselves and to move through grief, I think that you have to do that self-care that we're talking about. And I think you have to do it for your body, for your mind, and for your soul, because we are these complex human beings. So taking care of yourself around your body, this quote talks about that how grief can affect us physically, that grief actually can affect our health, can affect the way that we think, can affect work performance. It can exacerbate existing conditions. And so grief has a real impact on our body.
Many years, everyone expected that when our child died or our sibling or our loved one died or our grandchild died, we expected, we knew we were going to have emotional pain. But I think just over the last few years, are we really understanding that grief physically, it is mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, and it does hurt, and to pay attention to that. And the fact that you've experienced it and that we're sharing this information, it's something people really have to be aware of how all-encompassing grief can be to your life, and how it's trauma. We literally are going through trauma.
It is trauma, and trauma doesn't just stop because a calendar page turned. And
right.
And additionally, we can't just sit by and let it happen to us. At some point, we have to be able to start taking care of ourselves to the point that we can move through this grief. So it starts with eating well, and that sounds so basic, but the first couple of weeks, maybe the first month, I lived on buttered challah bread and hot tea. Nothing else tasted good. Everything else just tasted like lead in my stomach. And then I went to the other extreme and gained 20 pounds because nothing tasted good. I kept trying something, hoping that would make my pain stop. And finally, now at almost year 3, I feel like I'm able to, because I now can, I'm now paying attention to making sure I eat as well as I can, getting rid of all the processed food and whole food and just stuff that's going to feed my body and feed me so that I can start to have physical strength again. I think sleep is a gigantic issue. I can't tell you, I think especially early on, how elusive sleep is, how tortured sleep is, how sometimes it becomes the moment of every day in which you think, okay, I made it through this day, but if I'm lying here with my head on this pillow and every feeling that I had today that I couldn't look at is now jumping on my head, and sleep can be very elusive. I've watched a lot of reruns that come on at 1 and 2 in the morning. And for me, a sleep strategy was putting literally children's lullabies, little tiny lullabies on my iPod and listening to that as I went to sleep, just so that I couldn't hear the voices of grief. Moving every day, I found, was so important. I felt like I was fighting my way through sludge every day. I could bear every step was an effort. Your feet feel heavy. Your body, you can't move, your brain is dull. And so one of the ways to try to move myself through that sludge, if you will, was to just do some gentle movement. I wasn't out there, doing huge exercise, just very gentle yoga, gentle stretching, something that kept my body from feeling like I was just buried in my own tomb.
There's some research now in yoga that shows it actually changes some brain chemistry in the amygdala of the brain. So when you're ready, I think that first early time, you're lucky to be able to walk around the block. But as you get a little further on, did you feel ashamed or embarrassed about working out, though? Like people might think you didn't really love your kid?
Oh, such a great question. Don't people judge us over the silliest things? I did it very quietly. I did it personally, mostly because I couldn't stand to be around that many people. So I did it really privately. At first, I couldn't face a gym or anything. Just taking a walk with a friend kind of removes that judgment. Nobody's going to judge you for, taking a walk. So you can do it really simply.
I'm thinking back, about the eating and the sleeping and the moving every day, how so many of us are so different. Some people, I was on the fry everything diet after Ashley died, and I didn't move. And I jokingly tell people, this used to be a joke, but I mean, I fried chicken, I fried potatoes, and I said if I had a recipe for green beans, I would have fried them too. And that used to be funny. So I went to a restaurant in Nashville, and they had fried green beans. I'm like, gosh, if I would have had that.
I was going to say something else that was really helpful for me that was completely unexpected was getting a massage every now and then. And I realized that taking a walk doesn't cost any money. A massage does. And, maybe you can get a friend or a loved one to even just gently massage your feet and your hands. But I was not prepared for how a loving touch, a non-sexual touch, but a very loving, gentle touch opened up my spirit, my heart to express emotions that I didn't even know I needed to express. And there was something about massage. And so that's one of the things I tell people now is to, when you can, get a massage, and you will be amazed at, you may cry your way through it. I laid on that table and cried the entire time, but it was such a cleansing, healing thing to feel that touch on my skin, and how that connected to my emotions and my spirit, and released some feelings that I wasn't able to say any other way.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then the last thing go ahead.
Well, and one other thing I want to throw in there is also in drinking lots of water. People staying hydrated is huge, and for people especially early in grief too.
Yeah, and this may sound silly, but breathe. You know what? Breathe. Because you find, especially early on, you're taking these very shallow breaths, just kind of, because you're kind of in this horrible place, and just taking little tiny breaths. But to even just take deep breaths and then releasing them, have a way of resetting your mind, your heart, your body. It brings a kind of a moment of grace in the middle of the terrible agony of the loss. The last thing I would say on the body is medication if needed. Depression so often in grief, and sometimes you don't need medication. It's like, I don't want my pain to stop. I'm okay. It's okay for me to be grieving. And then sometimes when it starts interfering with your life and you can't even move at all, medication might be helpful, and there's no shame in that at all.
I will say that I found sleeping pills really great for about a month. I just couldn't get any sleep. And that really helped me.
Yeah, it's good. Well, if we keep talking about, self-care, so that's kind of body, some things that I think can help you start moving through the grief as it relates to the body. And then as it comes to, our mind and our emotions, I'm a firm believer in grief support groups. And you guys are, the masters at that, of offering that to people. But I think because children die through so many different avenues, I lost my son to suicide. Other people lose their children to an accident or to an illness or a stillbirth, or, it's just kind of endless the ways that we've lost our precious children. But to be a part of a support group that relates to your child, how your child was lost to you, I think that that's so helpful, because you walk in that room and those people get you. They get you. And that is so valuable in dealing with all the feelings that come with our loss. I also really believe in therapy. Personal counseling has really been an integral part of healing to me. Family members and friends, they just can kind of reach their limit of listening to us, and sometimes we need to talk more than they can listen. And if it's available to you, a therapist, a counselor, occasionally, who can just will listen non-judgmentally, and will listen to you say the same thing 300 times, and it's okay. Sometimes that can be really beneficial.
Make sure that you get somebody who understands the grief and loss world, though, because as a therapist, there are people who don't understand grief and loss, and you need to find somebody who does. Ask around, or go to Association of Death Educators online. They have therapists that are trained to deal with grief.
And Gloria, I'd like, there's a distinct difference here, and I'm glad that you put them this way on here, Kay. And I'd like you, Gloria, to respond on this, because a lot of people, grief support group and therapy, people say, well, which is better? And sometimes you need both. What a lot of times people don't understand is, a grief support group such as TCF, we're peer-to-peer. We just share our stories. But there are many times that a situation calls for more than what we can offer. And sometimes a therapist can help you get insight, but they don't understand the loss. And Gloria, don't you think it's important that people understand that it's not necessarily just one thing that's going to help you? You might need both.
I agree, absolutely. And plus there are techniques like now, like rapid eye desensitization. If you've really been in a traumatic situation, you may need some biofeedback. There are different things that people understand now about the brain that we haven't understood before. So therapy is great with a support group.
Journaling for me was a place that I didn't have to censor myself. I could say anything. I could put any feeling of anger or rage or absolute despondency, anything. I could put it down in a journal and know that it was a way to just open myself up to walk through this grief. And for me, it has been one of my greatest comforters, because all the stuff that I've written down over these last 3 years, I can go back and read and go, not only do I relive what I was feeling, but I also gain the insights. I end up sometimes being my own best comforter, because the things that came to me on a particular day or a particular moment were really helpful. And as I go back through and read, even if it's just a sentence or two, it can be such a powerful way of helping you move through grief. And then
also, when you put things down, you also don't have to remember them either. I mean, you don't have to worry that you won't remember.
That's true. And that is what happens. We do tend to forget. We think, oh, I'll never forget that feeling, or I'll never forget that incident, or I'll never forget that insight. And unfortunately, we do, partly because we're in shock and in trauma, as you say, and our minds don't hold on to those things, but partly just because so much life happens on a daily basis, those things just don't stick with us. And so journaling is a powerful tool. One of the things that people might be surprised at is I talk about rediscovering pleasure as a vital self-care strategy. Small steps to sit in the sun for 15 minutes, to take a short walk. Yeah, to look at the moon and the stars, listen to music, something small, but something that awakens you again to pleasure. I think you guys will completely agree with this. Early on in loss, you can feel guilty for even experiencing pleasure of any kind. And part of me didn't want to feel pleasure. To feel pleasure meant that I wasn't feeling the grief, and so I wouldn't let myself experience pleasure. And a few months after Matthew died, he died in April, and that previous Christmas, my husband had bought tickets for an Andrea Bocelli concert and the Hollywood Bowl, and it was just like this really big deal, and we paid, money for these tickets, and here it was now, in June, and Matthew had passed away. He'd been gone like 2.5 months, and it was like, the last thing I want to do is go to a concert. But we went, and I sat outside in the sun, and I closed my eyes, and the music that Andrea Bocelli sang, the music was so exquisitely beautiful that all I could do was weep. I sat with my eyes closed, just letting the beauty of those words and that music float out over the night air. It released something so powerful within me, and I was experiencing both grief and pleasure at the same time. And the lesson I have taken from that is to just continue to keep myself open to rediscovering pleasure in small ways. It will help you move through this terrible, terrible grief and mourning process.
Lady sent us a question. I lost my only younger sister, Vanessa, August of 2013. So we're talking about 3 years, to suicide. She was 25. When new friends ask me, do I have any siblings, how do I say she passed away without opening up a can of worms about her suicide? When I tell new people my sister committed suicide, they look at me with pity or distance themselves. It makes me feel different or terrible. It makes me feel like people look at me completely differently when they hear or find out that my sister committed suicide. It makes me feel so alone.
Oh man, I can identify with that so powerfully. And I think any of us who have experienced loss through suicide know that there's a level of societal taboo around suicide, and we get tarred and feathered with that same brush because it was our loved one who died in such a terrible, traumatic way. And what I've done is I adapt my answer to that question based on who it is I'm talking to. So if it's somebody that let's just say I'm at a business party or business event, and you know the cocktail hour where you're standing there, and you may never see that person again, and you're just kind of making polite chit chat. And if they ask me about my children, I will generally say I have 3: Amy, Josh, and Matthew, and leave it at that. So I don't feel the need to tell that total stranger who I really don't have any relationship with and probably may never see again. I don't necessarily feel the need to tell them the story. And then if I meet somebody that I think, maybe it's a little bit different, and there's the likelihood that I'm going to see this person again and they're going to know my story, I might say, I have 3, to that same question, how many children do you have? Or do you have children? Yes, I have 3. They're Amy, Josh, and Matthew is in heaven. And sometimes they'll just say, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, and they don't ask what happened. If they ask what happened, I will try to say something like, he took his own life after decades of living with mental illness. And sometimes I get that kind of pull away reaction. Sometimes they try to be gentle, and I can decide based on that how much I want to go any further in that conversation with that person. And then people that looks like, this is somebody that could potentially be a friend or somebody who I haven't seen in a long time and they might not know. I just very gently say, and I need to tell you that he passed away, he took his own life, and we are learning, how to live again after losing him in such a terrible way. And you're not going to be able to control the response of other people. Some of them, because there is such a taboo and discomfort talking about suicide, they will, walk away from you, or they'll give you that look and kind of shut you down. Other people hopefully will be a little more compassionate and at least, say, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. And then there will be those people who will genuinely look at you with compassion and offer, a quick hug or a hand on your shoulder or on your, pat your hand or something. And it's a tough one, which is part of the reason I'm working so hard for, dispelling the stigma around suicide, because it doesn't need to be a taboo.
I'll have to say one thing, and I think Alan can probably identify with this too. I know that you get a stronger thing with suicide, but you know what? When I even say my son died, there are people who run the other way.
Absolutely. Yep.
Don't you find that, Alan?
Yeah. We're not comfortable with death.
No, and on the self-care mind, the last thing we didn't talk about, and I think suicide is certainly an example from my experience of working with many suicide families, is there's always that part of, could I have done, should I have seen, could I, every loss has its own set of complications. But you talk about in self-care strategies, forgive. What do you mean by forgive in that self-care strategy?
Well, because when I talk about forgiveness and as a way to move through grief, at some point you have to let people off the hook for not being there for you in the way that you needed. I mean, whether it was through suicide, through an accident, through stillbirth, through whatever means your child or your sibling or your loved one passed away, you can guarantee that there will be people who will not or did not show up for you in the way that you would have expected. And you have to be able to forgive people for not saying the right thing, for comparing your loss to, oh, I lost my dog last year, or, oh, yeah, I lost my uncle. And you want to go, are you kidding me? This is my child you're talking about. And so you have to deal with the fact that people aren't going to be there for you sometimes in the way that you want. They said the wrong thing, and to give them grace, knowing that most people don't intentionally wound us with their words or their actions. And if they haven't walked in our shoes, if they have not lost a child, they simply do not know what it's like, even if they think they do, and they don't mean to make it worse. So in some sense, you have to give them a pass. I'm learning more and more how to give people a pass, and just to think to myself, rather than be offended that they said the wrong thing, or they ignored my loss, or they bypassed it, or they didn't show up when I was really expecting them to, is to decide I don't have the emotional energy to waste it on bitterness and unforgiveness. It's hard enough to deal with the loss of my son. I don't want to spend any of that precious emotional energy on bitterness and unforgiveness. I need every bit of my emotional strength to learn how to breathe again, how to not only survive, but to thrive. And so forgiveness is a vital part of your self-care.
And may I say to everyone who's listening, we're also thinking about siblings, as the lady just said she lost her sibling. When we say children, because we both lost kids, Heidi's not here to stand up for the siblings, but she'd be right there with it. You know, we've got another question here, and I think that it's important, because moving on to the next one, I think that you can answer this in connection with our next slide about attending church, synagogue, that kind of thing. Because our question is, do you include children who are no longer with you in your holiday celebration? And if so, how?
That's a great question. I was going to talk about that a little bit later, but I can sure address that now, because I think that just depends on the family. I don't think there is a right or a wrong way. I know that there are families who set a place. You know, there's a place setting at the family table at holiday gatherings that commemorates, you know, the person that was lost. There, for us, I put, for instance, on our Christmas tree, because Matthew was single, he never took all of all of his Christmas ornaments. My other kids, when they got married, they took, you know, the Christmas ornaments that they had accrued through their lifetime with them and put them now on their tree in their home. Well, Matthew was single, and so he never, you know, he always just said, oh, just keep them at your house, Mom. So at Christmas, I have the option. I can either, you know, leave his ornaments in, you know, in the tin, or I can put them out. And I tell you, every year now, we've had 3 Christmases, and each year it is an excruciatingly painful moment for me to open up the tins that contain his ornaments. But I take them out and I put them on the tree, because for me, they keep him near, they keep him close. Not everybody does that. And so there isn't a right and wrong on that. I think it's what your family can tolerate, what your family can do that does not make, I think it's really important that our surviving children don't lose us in the process. Mm-hmm. And I try to talk so gently to parents who, you know, years later can't celebrate Christmas or can't celebrate birthdays or can't do that because it's just so painful. And they're surviving children. I was at an event recently where a mother and daughter came, and the adult daughter looked at me with tears streaming down her face, and she said, I lost my mother when I lost my brother. And the mother was saying, I can't help it. I can't help it. You don't know what it's like. And I felt the pain of both of them. And so what I'm trying to do is to not let my surviving children and my grandchildren lose me. They've already lost their brother or their Uncle Matthew. I don't want them to lose me too.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the things that you can do is during this Easter holiday, you can just put a rose or something in a little vase and include them that way, you know, things that remind you of them. Also, if you're doing a dinner or something, you can give a toast to the deceased loved one. But as Kay said, you say, this is for my deceased son and for my living children and all the grandchildren or whoever. Include everybody in the toast, but start out with them. Yep. And if you don't want to give the toast, ask someone else to give it.
Sure.
Okay, I have a question for you, Kay, that I've had texted to me here from a friend, and I think because of hearing you speak and I knowing your story so well, I think you answered this question as eloquently as I may have ever heard. But I'm not going to say who it is, but here's the question, is basically that after his son died in a motorcycle, he was very involved in a church, and he was mad at God, still is mad at God. But many of his church friends believed, that he just didn't have enough faith. And so now he's mad at God. He does kind of stuck in a conundrum, but kind of saying, how do you handle that? He's part of church.
Yeah.
But he can't be around those people right now.
Yeah, and let me just start, when we're talking about now about the soul, because now we're talking about the soul. We've talked about the body, we've talked about the mind and emotions, and now we're talking about the soul. And so I'm going to circle around to that, but I'm going to start by saying I really encourage people to attend church or synagogue or the mosque, whatever your place of worship is that you're used to going to. They're a natural place to bring our grief and our sorrow, because that's where the soul is talked about. That's the place where the soul is nurtured and honored in our society. But I also know, just as your friend has said, that church can be, or any place of worship can be really hard. The music, the prayers, the traditions, they can trigger some really deep feelings. And some people that I've talked to, have not returned once their baby, their child, their loved one died. They've never gone back because it was so painful, partly because of all those reminders that, really can burrow deep into your soul, and partially because of the folks who were there who did not seem to understand their grief and who didn't make place for it, who didn't make space at the table for people who are living with grief.
Right.
And that is so hurtful because, as I said, church, synagogue, mosque, that's where your soul is supposed to be nurtured and where you're supposed to be able to bring yourself. And those feelings of anger at God, if we were going through this self-care strategy, if we kept kind of going through here, the other ones are, personal prayer and meditation, that I really believe that I have to intentionally nurture my soul. I have to intentionally spend time in prayer, in meditation. And part of that meditation is me telling God sometimes, God, I am so mad at you. You could have stopped this. You could have kept my son from taking his life. I mean, I am as gut level honest as I know how to be. And I would encourage your friend who wrote that it's okay. God can handle our questions. God can handle our anger. God can handle our reproach, if you would, our sometimes shaking our fist in his face and saying, I don't get this. This is a rough thing that I don't know how I can stand. So when I talk about attending church, it's not pasting on a smile and pretending like everything is okay. When I talk about personal meditation and prayer, it's not repeating things that you think other people want you to hear. It's being honest with God about the depth of the loss and the suffering and the sorrow that you are experiencing.
I've got two questions here, and they're both involved with anger. And Alan brought his up, and we've got two here talk about being angry. But a woman whose daughter died 14 months ago, and then her brother committed suicide 6 months ago, and she's asking, did you go through a period of faith struggle? She wants to know about you. And she said, because of Easter and the time of resurrection, I just find myself, I don't know, angry.
Yeah, I would love to just talk for an hour on this topic, because I think particularly for people who maybe are Christians or believers who have had a strong maybe relationship with God, and they feel like their lives they're doing everything quote right, and suddenly the rug gets pulled out from underneath them and somebody they love dies. And it can truly shake your faith. It can truly leave you feeling like you're on quicksand and you don't even know how to stand up. And naturally, we look to somebody outside of ourselves to say, hey, you're supposed to be running this universe. You messed up. You messed up big time. And I don't like it. And in fact, I am so mad at you, and I can't make sense of this. And my faith is shaky too now, and I don't know what to do. And there's just nothing worse than losing your child and losing your faith at the same time. That is a deep and profound loss. And so this whole last section here on soul care about rebuilding hope that I want to come to, I really want to talk, because it goes with this, is about learning how to accept mystery. Because there are so many unanswerable questions that we have about the death. Because there is, we'll come back to those. So to accept mystery, there's so many unanswerable questions and so many whys that we cannot figure out, and you can exhaust yourself. Alan, you talked about it, should we have done this? What if we had done that? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I listen to that doctor? Why did I listen to that doctor? Why I did everything right and still, you know, my child died? Why? And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's part of grief. It's the language of grief, and ask those questions. For me, I am learning to accept the mystery that I truly will never be able to figure it all out. And I have this little pot, this little ceramic pot that I call my mystery pot. And I have actually written out my questions. I've written them out on little slips of paper, and I put them in that little ceramic pot, because it gives me, it's like something concrete I can do with the questions that I can't answer. But for me, at the end of the day, because my faith in God, my faith in Jesus Christ is so solid, I've spent more than 50 years sending my spiritual roots deep into the character and the goodness of God, even though I cannot answer all of my own questions, and I can't put a beautiful little bow, tie it around the package of my faith and say, bada bing, I've got it figured out and here's all the answers. I can't. But because I am learning to accept mystery, even if I could figure it all out, it wouldn't bring him back.
I want to comment one thing on that, because that's really powerful what you're saying. I think you say it in such an eloquent way. I do a lot of workshops around the country, have done for pastors and, you know, ministers and bereavement teams and compassion teams at churches. And you know, one of the things that they say, well, how can we help somebody that's that deep in grief? And I say, you know, one of the greatest things you can do is to you don't have to provide all the answers. So don't try to provide all the answers. The greatest gift you can give a grieving person in your church, the number one gift you can ever give, is to show up at the door, knock on the door, and simply say, we are here to hurt with you.
Absolutely.
And I said, you know, those people they not only leave you, they won't leave your church. You couldn't kick them out when we show up.
That's right.
And, you know, and so people ask, how do we, you know, in the faith world, how do we do that? That's how we do it. We show up, we get into that pot of grief, the mud puddle with you, and we sit with you and walk with you for as long as
through
you
the
need to walk.
mystery.
So I love that. I think that's just, it's brilliant. And because it's a duality, don't you think it's duality? It's both. You can have your faith and have your mystery too. You can have your faith and not have to have the answers.
Absolutely.
And that's how
if I had to have all the answers, it would be ridiculous, because I don't know where they all are. At the end of the day, I do believe that God can be trusted, and I do trust him. And I do trust that someday, when I see him face to face, when I, you know, at the end of my life, and I am resurrected in the same way that Jesus is, that my body rises from the grave, and I have a new body, with my soul and my body are reunited, is what I'm trying to say, in heaven, that God will answer. C.S. Lewis used to say that God, in your face, all my questions fade away, because you yourself are the answer. No answers here, very few answers here. I've kind of stopped looking for them. I can't figure it all out, but I do know that God can be trusted. And because of that, I'm willing to live with mystery and things that I cannot quite make sense to me right now. And so that has led me then to want to rebuild my hope. I want to rebuild my hope, because I don't want to live in that place forever of just on my face. I mean, I've been there. You can't rush through it. You can't make it go away. You can't make it happen any less than it is. And I'm not in any way telling anybody to move that process faster than they are. I'm just saying, for me, as I'm moving through, I am actively seeking to rebuild hope. And I have my faith. I like really tangible things. It helps me kind of feel like I've got my hands on it, and I can. So I have, not only do I have that mystery pot, but I have a hope box. And in my hope box, it says on the top, it says hope. And I've put in there verses that give me hope, words, expressions. You know, I fold up little pieces of paper that people have given me. I put little tiny things in there so that when I am having one of those days where I think, I can't survive this day, I can't. I miss him too much. I need him back. I need to hold him. I need to hug him. I've got to, and I can't. And that's one of those times I'll pick up my hope box, and I'll read through those verses. I'll listen to those songs that I've got listed there. I'll reread the words that friends have sent me, and it helps. I'm rebuilding slowly my hope, because my hope was crushed when my son died,
Right.
and I'm in this process of rebuilding my hope. There's a verse in Isaiah 45:3, and it's God talking, and he says, I will give you the treasures of darkness, riches hidden in secret places, so that you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who summons you by name. And what is so meaningful to me about that is it's acknowledging that there are times of darkness, and man, I am in that. But it also says that there's going to be some treasure there, that there's going to be some riches that are hidden in that secret place of darkness. And God says, and I'm going to meet you there. I'm the God that's so personal. I call you by name. And that gives me, that's one of those verses that's in my hope box, because it tells me that yes, even in the deepest darkness of this horrible grief of the loss of Matthew, that there are treasures, there's still beauty, there is still love, there is still pleasure, there is still goodness, there's still kindness, there's still music. Those things still exist in the world.
I was thinking it, and I was thinking, I wish Kay and Rick Warren lived in my neighborhood so I could go to Saddleback Church and get all that love.
Yeah.
This is what this
you can watch it
said.
online. Every
She
service
said,
is broadcast every week. You can watch it online.
all right, there you go. Well, maybe this is right for this lady, because she says her son was, I think she lost her son 9 weeks ago due to a genetic disorder. She said, maybe this will be talked about later, but what my fiance and I believe in God and Jesus, but we do not go to church.
Well, and I would, that's two things I would say. I am so glad that you at least have that comfort of knowing that God exists and that he's for you and he's with you and he loves you. I hope that that's really solid in your heart, because that is so very true. And at the same time, I would probably encourage you to look for a church that you really can feel comfortable at, because there's something really beautiful about being with other people who are also seeking to grow and to grow their spirit, to grow that inner person of the heart. And some people say, I don't need to go to church. I find God out in nature, and that's my church. And I would say, I hear you, man. Nobody loves nature more than I do. I feel the splendor of God in a sunset. I can just wax eloquent about a single flower. I'm kind of ridiculous like that, but there's something really powerful about being together with other people who also are looking to grow who they are as an individual, grow their spirit and grow in knowledge of God. And I think that there's some things that there's some comfort you can receive there. I think there's some spiritual strength that you could receive by being a part of that. And there's also places where you can give back. As you go through this terrible loss and the mourning and the grief, there will be places in which you can share some of that with other people. And a church, synagogue, those are great places to share what it is you also are learning. But I want to say that some faith traditions, we talked about how people are not always comfortable talking about death or about grief. And I feel like I have the ability to kind of use my grief to help other people start talking about grief. And unfortunately, sometimes at church, people want to rush us through that, or they're not comfortable talking about it. And if all of us who have lost children, and as we move through our grief and learn how to live again and how to thrive, we can actually make it more comfortable for other people to do. We can use our lives and our losses and what we've learned to help other people, so that when they go through losses, they know who to turn to, because they're going to look to us and say, you've done this and you've done this well. Show me, teach me, help me, because I don't even know, I can't even breathe right now. Quote there by Henry Nouwen that folks can look at. It basically just says that those who have come to rebuild their hope find joy even in their sadness. So people can look at that on their own. And then there was, I think there's just maybe, and then this is what I would say kind of in closing, as we get down to the practical realities of there's a holiday coming up in just a few days. And what I was looking for myself and just encouraging other people is to take maybe a small step toward hope, a small step into the future, based on the fact that, you know what, you can only do what you can do, but there might be a small step that you could do. Maybe if you don't go to church, you could go to church. Maybe if you think, I can't even celebrate Easter, you could read the Easter story by yourself. If you say, yeah, I'm going to get together with my family, but I don't think I can stand the Easter egg hunt, sit through it for 5 minutes. In other words, take a small step that seems super challenging to you right now as you think about it, but it just might be something that you could do, and even thinking about it, just even pondering it, is actually taking a step of hope into the future. And the beauty of Easter for me, as a very strong believer in Jesus Christ, is I have the absolute certainty that because Jesus rose from the dead, and he didn't just stay buried, he didn't just come and tell a few good stories and do a couple of really cool miracles and died. He actually rose from the dead. And because he did, that tells me that Matthew is alive, and that I too, someday, when I die, I will be resurrected. And it has the most amazing power of hope and joy to know that this life is not all there is. There is a concrete reason to celebrate at Easter. And even though there will be tears streaming down my face as I think about missing my precious son, how much I love him and how much I miss him, at the same time, I am completely full of hope for my future and for his future. And that's a reason for me to be able to celebrate even through my tears.
That's
okay,
fabulous.
I want to thank you. I want to say one more thing, and on the last slide about your book, Choose Joy, and that was a powerful title, and I've read the book. It's a terrific book. I find it fascinating that you wrote the book in the midst of going through the struggles with Matthew's mental illness, and that you wrote it, and it in many ways I think prepared you for where you are today. But it's a fantastic book. But the title of it, Choose Joy, is something that is very powerful, because Gloria and I talk about this all the time. The death of your child or your grandchild or your sibling I don't know of a greater pain. If there is one, I don't know what it is. But but grieving is about choosing. And your PowerPoint today gave so many choices of things that we can do. But in the end, we can choose joy. And even though you wrote that before you had experienced this, I believe from what you're saying, you stand just as strongly today that we can choose joy. It may take a while to get there, but the hope is that we can choose joy, and we can actually find joy again in our lives, even despite these losses. And I think that's your story. So your book is awesome. I thank you so much. Gloria, do you have any other questions for Kay?
You know what?
It's been fantastic tonight.
I've got one last question for Kay, and I know it's late, but I feel like we really need to answer this lady. And I know you'll be able to do this. Her child took his life. He was 26. He accepted Christ as a younger child, but rejected Christ later. He had mental illness, and then he took his life. And she said, should I feel reassured that he's with the Lord now?
Absolutely. It is my great joy to be able to tell you that when we give our lives to Jesus Christ, they are safe in his hand, even when mental illness or other things cause us to make different thoughts or choices later on. It is not dependent on anything other than what God did. John 10, Jesus says, know my sheep, and they are in my hands, and nobody can take them out of my hands. Your boy is safe. He is right now in the embrace of Jesus. His pain is gone, and when you see him again, he will run to meet you whole and in his right mind, and you can be absolutely certain on that, not because of what I say, but because of what Jesus did. Look at John 10. You'll see it there.
I want to wish everybody a peaceful Easter, and our hope is that you get through Easter. Gloria?
Absolutely. Peace and love to you all.
Okay.
Oh, I wish you joy.